Hey there, got my silage tarp in. We're gonna be putting this out across the area where the third tunnel is gonna go. So I'll take this opportunity to talk all about silage tarps. So this is the area for where the third tunnel is gonna go. And I did a video recently about how we prepped all this ground out with the ditches and we tilled out here already. We got a little bit of rain yesterday and this morning, and it's not super wet out here, but frankly, I don't see a lot of rain coming up, and we're just gonna try to get as moist as possible. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So what we're gonna be using the tarp for here is to cover the ground to what's called occultate, or block all the sunlight to kill all the weeds here. And I wanna get into the pros and cons, because there are pros and cons of this method and a lot of details and stuff like that. But I think before we get to that, I wanna get this tarp out and laid out so that it's just taken care of. Oh man, this thing is heavy. All right, so this is a 32 by 105 foot tarp. The tunnel is 14 by 100, but we're gonna be overlapping the two ditches and some space just below the third tunnel as well. And I mentioned that in that other video. So we'll get this guy all rolled out. We got the tarp all set up and it's looking awesome. So I want to get into everything I can about silage tarps today. We're going to talk about why you might want to use a silage tarp, pros and cons, tips for using them, and frequently asked questions. All right, so why would you want to use a silage tarp? Well, my main reason for using a silage tarp is, look how much less mowing I have to do. I'm just kidding. You guys know I don't like mowing, so anyways, no, that is not why. There are three reasons. The main reason though is for what's called occultation. Occultation is when you're blocking the light from something, and that's what's going on here. Is this tarp is blocking the light from hitting the ground. And we're gonna get more into that later in this video, but essentially what I'm doing here is I'm trying to kill all the grasses and weeds that are growing here or would grow here so that I can create beds out here. This is where my third tunnel is gonna go. So we're gonna get more into that later, as I said. The second reason you can use a silage tarp is the silage tarp is black on this side and white on the other side. So if you use the whole tarp or you cut into pieces or whatever, if you wanna cover a bed or a couple beds with a tarp with the white side facing up, you can use that to help increase germination, especially in the warmer months where it's hard to keep the soil moist. And for certain crops, especially like carrots and things like that take a while to germinate, if you seed your crops out and then water them in really well and then put the tarp on with the white side up, it'll keep the soil cooler and it'll keep the moisture in the ground and keep it and get it to germinate a lot better. The third thing you can do is you can use a silage tarp in areas let's say further north than I am, and let's say you get a heavy snowpack or you have a really, really wet late winter, early spring. Well, if the ground is covered with a silage tarp, it'll stay a lot drier. You can pull off the tarp and this will be the first area or areas that you can plant into. There are a lot of pros to using silage tarps, and I think the biggest one is that it's a huge savings for labor. When you set up a silage tarp, it's pretty quick. You pull out the tarp, you put a bunch of weight on it, and you just let it hang out. And that's pretty much all the farmer input you need until you're ready to pull a tarp off whenever it's ready. So when you pull it off, you can either build beds or plant into beds that are already there. So again, it's a huge savings in time because you're letting nature do its thing over the course of weeks or months and killing what's there, and you're not really putting much time into it. The other thing is the silage tarps are fairly inexpensive. In terms of a tool, they're pretty cheap. And they do last quite a while. If you take care of them, they can last several seasons on your farm. The other thing is it can be used for a wide variety of applications. Like I mentioned, we can use it for occultation, we can use it for germination, and we can also use it to protect the ground and keep it dry in wet weather. Before we get onto the cons, you might be thinking, hey Josh, silage tarps sound pretty cool. Where do I get them? Well, perfect time for me to talk about today's sponsor, which is Farmer's Friend. This silage tarp, my Caterpillar tunnels, and my greens harvester are all from Farmer's Friend. I absolutely love their products and I use them on my farm all the time and I really rely on them. Not only do they have these products, they have a lot of other great things, and they're just innovating and developing and selling tools to help market gardeners, small farmers and gardeners all over the place. I really recommend that you check out their products. I'll leave links down below for you to do that, and I want to thank them for helping farmers everywhere and also sponsoring this channel. There are a few cons with using silage tarps, and I think the biggest and most obvious con is there's a lot of plastic, and I don't like buying this much plastic, but there are a few times in market gardening and small farming where plastic can be very beneficial, and it's kind of a trade-off, but it can provide a couple of big wins for the farm. One great example is the greenhouse plastic here. So these tunnels, because the beds are covered, allows me to grow way more food that I could otherwise and get that to my local community. The silage tarp here is great because it's going to save me as a farmer a ton of time, because I just pull it out and it'll start working. And then it's very effective as well, so I'll be saving more time on the back end in terms of weeding and cultivation, because I won't have as many weeds in my beds after building my beds here. This plastic is reusable, and there's a lot of situations in agriculture where people are using plastic mulches that are one-time use. So I get completely if you don't want to be buying new plastic and using it in this way. I totally understand that. So there's definitely a con to using silage tarps. There's a couple other cons. One is if there's a lot of rainwater sitting on the tarps for a long period of time, you can create a little bit of compaction there. But I don't think that's as much of a concern, but it's something to think of. And lastly, it does take, if you're using this for occultation, it does take quite a bit of time through the season to get it to kill everything. So it is a slow process, but very effective. I wanted to get in some tips about ensuring a successful occultation and just using silage tarps in general. The first thing before you even put the tarp down is you may have to make sure that you're prepping the ground well. And so here, which I talked about in that previous video, I'll leave a link down below, is that we tilled all this up here and dug these drainage ditches, and then we're going to cover it up with the tarp. So if you have to do any tillage, or you have to move any earth around, or you have to dig drainage, make sure you do all that ahead of time so that when you cover up with the tarp, you don't have to come back and disturb it again. And there's a couple options for after you pull the tarp off. So here, I'm going to be building lasagna beds, which I've done everywhere else. So we'll pull the tarp off, and then we'll probably Broadfork it. We'll put down cardboard everywhere, and then wood chips and compost. And you guys know I've taught many videos about that. The other option though is you could shape your beds ahead of time, then pull the tarp over, and then when you're ready, when everything's killed, you just pull the tarp off and you can plant right into it. Another thing is you want to try to get the soil as moist as possible before you put the tarp on. And the reason for this is, especially if you've tilled, there's going to be those weed seeds that have been brought to the surface. You want to try to force them to germinate. So by getting the ground moist, having the tarp on it, which will heat up the ground a little bit, will create those seeds to germinate. And because they don't have any light, they'll come to the surface and then they'll die. And because we're not going to come back in and disturb the soil again, they just won't come back. So you want to try to force germinate them. So having the soil a little bit moist when you put the tarp on is also really helpful. Another thing, couple things to keep in mind is have a few people around when you're moving tarps. If you have a big tarp like this out on a field in a windy day, it can be devastating very quickly. I've done it with having too few people on a windy day before, and it's really stressful. So luckily today it was just Gene and I, and it wasn't windy, so we were able to get that done. The other thing is that you want to make sure you have enough weight down on the tarp. It just takes one windy day and the tarp's across the field and you're by yourself, or you don't have enough help to get it back on, and it can be really frustrating. So put down more weight than you think. The other thing is you want to think about the size of the tarp and how that's going to be used on your farm. So I'll talk about the specifics here as an example. So this is a 32 by 105 foot tarp. And it's another reason why I like getting silage tarps from Farmer's Friend, is because they come in 105 foot lengths. Now, why is that important? My tunnels are 100 feet long, and so by having an extra 5 feet, it gives me a lot of wiggle room. And a lot of tarps that I've purchased before or have seen, they're like 100 feet long. So having an extra little bit of length is great. Now, what about the 32 feet? Well, why does that work? Well, it works out great for this space here right now. But when we're done with this occultation, I'm going to cut the tarp in half the lengthwise. So I'll have two tarps that are 16 by 105. And the reason for that are my tunnels are 14 feet wide. So if I have a 16 foot wide tarp, that's going to go inside of my tunnel perfectly. So if I have cover crops, let's say over the next summer, maybe as I take some time off next summer, and I want to occultate those cover crops and kill that before going into fall planting, well, that 16 foot silage tarp will cover one of the tunnels perfectly. So I really want you to think about, the size of your field blocks or tunnels or things like that, and try to get tarps that either match them, or if you're building new beds or new blocks or a new farm, is think about the sizes of your blocks and see if you can get that to line up with some of the tarps. Because if you have one big tarp that you can pull over a field, man, that's really helpful for occultation, setting up new beds, and also especially if you're trying to keep them dry coming out of late winter and into early spring, like I mentioned before. So keep that in mind, and either buy the right tarps or find the right tarps that fit your areas. A couple of questions I get asked about all the time. The first of which is, how long does this take? Well, I can't give you a definitive answer because it depends on a few factors. The biggest one is what time of year you have the tarp on the ground. So the factor there is the heat. And so the tarps are way more effective in the summertime than they are in the wintertime because it's warm in the summer. And it's not just the blocking of the light is what's killing what's growing there, but also the heat because it's a piece of black plastic. So in the summertime, the plastic will heat up more and heat up the ground more and kill things quicker. So in general, for most things in the summertime, it should take a few months. In the wintertime, it could take several months, if not the whole winter, depending on the timing, obviously. The other part of it is what's growing there. So some things are more persistent and take a lot longer to kill. Some perennial weeds, certain grasses, some of those things could take longer. So the answer is it takes as long as it takes. And just plan ahead and give yourself more of a buffer than you think, because the worst thing you can do is start killing things but not finish it, and then you didn't get anywhere because those are just going to grow up and grow through your beds. And the big benefits of these no-till systems is that you're killing everything, you're building the beds and not disturbing the ground anymore, and you just reduce the weed pressure significantly. And so the key to that is you want to clear them out ahead of time, disturb it as little as possible moving forwards, and build your beds, and you'll be in really good shape. What are some alternatives to silage tarps? Well, if you want to cover the ground like this, another option, you could use old billboards. I haven't done that personally, but I've heard of people doing that. Again, I don't have experience with it. They kind of look funny. They're going to be in weird shapes, but maybe they're a little bit cheaper, and you might feel better about, reusing plastic versus like someone producing brand new plastic. So that's an option for you. The other thing is you can use animals to clear land. I've done that several times here. When I built all my beds in 2018 here at the farm, and also when we rebuilt the beds in the tunnels, I had chickens at the time, so I had them clear out all the ground ahead of time, and that can work well too. So a lot of different options out there. In conclusion, silage tarps are an incredible tool. They're very effective and require a minimal amount of input from the farmer, which I absolutely love. I recommend for most people that they have one or two on hand for different applications. And remember, you can cut them up into different sizes if you're a gardener or working on, weird shaped lots and sizes and stuff like that. So very versatile. And again, if you're looking to pick one up, I highly recommend you check out today's sponsor, Farmer's Friend. Again, links down below. I'll keep you posted on the progress with this. Again, we'll be building beds in the fall. It's now early August, putting this on the ground. Keep you posted and let you guys follow along. So hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit subscribe if you are not already, and we'll see you in the next one.